Hello, everyone. As many of you know, June is Pride Month. So we wanted to make something interesting to celebrate and to show our pride. Today, I'm glad to share this Facebook Live conversation with my very dear colleague, Jonathan Chait, Consul General of Mexico in Miami. Hola, Johnny.
Hola, Marcela. Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting for me and be part of this conversation with someone amazing as well.
Sure. And our special guest, Amazin Léthi, who has been very proactive in fighting for the LGBTQ rights around the globe. Before we start, I would like to introduce Amazin. Amazin Léthi is a global Vietnamese LGBTQ sports and human rights advocate. She created the Amazin Léthi Foundation to support and address youth homelessness through leadership and sports foundation as the platforms for change. In 2020, she became the first Asian LGBTQ athlete to be honored at the Brooklyn Nets' fourth annual Pride Night and is a proud ambassador for Stonewalk UK, Athlete Ally, and Vietnam Relief Services. If you would like to learn more about Amazin's career, please visit her website, and the link is below the comments in the comments section. I met Amazin on September last year, and we agreed in joining efforts to raise awareness about LGBTQ's rights and organize some events in person to commemorate Pride Month this year. Unfortunately, as a result of COVID-19, we had to cancel them. But coronavirus did not stop us and is not going to stop us. Now, thanks to technology, Los Angeles and Miami are ready to hear amazing journeys breaking down barriers against discrimination. But before that, dear Jonathan, I think that you have a very important information that you would like to share with us.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having Miami in this conversation. I've been following Amazing's career as well, and she's an outstanding person. And she's an ambassador. She's a diplomat in a way. So we have that connection with her. And it's important for me also as an openly gay diplomat to be in this conversation. As you know, being part of this community and also being a diplomat and to be part of the foreign ministry that actually is in charge of the agenda of the human rights Mexico abroad. This is very important for me to be participating in this. It's a perfect way of celebrating Pride and with this particular conversation. So for the foreign ministry, it's a very important topic as well. Of course, there's still some things, some challenges, but we're moving forward and glad to be part of this movement in Mexico and also from the foreign ministry. So with that said, I will be happy to start this conversation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. So amazing. You're our guest, and we're privileged to have you today. So would you like to share a little bit more about your career and how come you are nowadays an activist in this?
Sure. Firstly, thank you so much, Marcella and Jonathan, for having me. It's a wonderful honor to be speaking with both your consulates regarding sharing my story and talking about equality. You know, I think with any person that is in activism, it really comes through a personal journey of, what have people experienced. Growing up as a child, I was a transracial adoptee. So I grew up in an all white background. So physically, I always looked different from everyone else. So I was bullied constantly in society. I was bullied constantly at school by school kids and even the teachers. And, that really affected me, and also being somewhat confused inside in terms of figuring out who I was and struggling with my sexual identity as well, because I never saw an Asian person on TV. I'd never met an LGBTQ person, so I couldn't really put my finger on who I was or what name it was. And I think, many LGBTQ people go through that experience where they feel very singular and alone in their feelings. And I really felt like I was the only Asian LGBTQ person in the world, literally in the world. And, through being bullied constantly, I really tried to find, I think, because everyone wants to have some form of community. So I really went into sports. I did a lot of team sports, but I found very quickly that I was the only Asian kid in sports. So, the bullying and the discrimination followed me through sport. So it was very challenging, but I loved sport, and I always wanted to try and find a way to make an impact through sports. I remember quite clearly, and I think a lot of LGBTQ kids and a lot of kids that feel different, and a lot of minority kids, experience a terrible amount of bullying as a child, particularly within the school system, through the kids at school as well as the teachers. And I remember one poignant moment when I must have been about 7 or 8, and a teacher made me stand up in front of the entire class with about 30 kids and said, "This is what failure looks like. And at most in life, I'll be the one person that would fail." And I just remember how humiliated I felt, and thinking, I would never feel this humiliated again. And I never want anyone to experience this kind of humiliation. And the teacher made me stand up as all the kids laughed at me. And then as I sat down, she threw, I remember it so poignantly, a blackboard eraser, and the wooden bit just kind of hit me on my head there. That was kind of one experience that really affected me with, with all the work that I do now around anti-bullying in the Asian community and also the LGBTQ community. And with all the bullying that I went through in team sports, I ended up going into bodybuilding, which was very unusual for a child, and particularly an Asian kid at that. But I loved the sport, and I loved what it did for me in terms of my mental health and confidence and self-worth. And I went to the gym very early on. I must have been like 7, 8 or so, which was very unusual then. So I went very quickly from childhood sports into a very male-dominated, misogynistic, sexist sport. So I knew exactly what adult sports felt like, particularly around men. And I encountered a terrible amount of sexism to my face and behind my back. But I love the sport so much, of what it just did for my self-confidence. And then I competed competitively as a teenager, and I qualified as a fitness coach and started training other athletes, going to the Olympics and other kind of competitive athletes. But I still held a lot of pain inside of me because of the amount of bullying that I had received as a child and as a teenager, also in the workplace as well, because there were no anti-discrimination laws back when I was a teenager, and still struggling with my sexuality as well. And, as a young adult, I think, for many LGBTQ people, because we hold so much in, at some point, it's like a ticking time bomb. You have to let it go. And, when I found the club scene with other young adults, I literally just spiraled out of control. I ended up in a bad crowd that was doing drugs, drinking, partying all night. And I just one thing led to another. And I think for many people, we're, a paycheck away from poverty, and sometimes, one person away from ending up in the bad crowds. And I ended up as a young adult homeless for a period of time, in and out of different shelters, feeling very suicidal, constantly having severe mental health, very, very depressed, living in poverty. And it was really one of my darkest years. And I kind of realized then what it's like to live on the margins and how society treats you when you're right at the edge of the margins, and not feeling like you have a support system, and not feeling like there are any programs for you to pull you out. And I think, it was definitely my darkest time. And that has really, through my own personal journey, shaped the person that I am today. And I really believe that, sports was my survival mechanism, because many people ask me, how did you get out of that situation? Because, the LGBTQ youth community only makes up 3 to 5% of the entire youth community, but over 40 to 50% are made homeless for various different reasons. And usually one of the main reasons is because they're not accepted at home. It was very hard without a support network. And I just remember another poignant moment in my life where I literally slept for 2 days straight, woke up the third day crying uncontrollably. I just remember sitting in the corner in a fetal position, crying for the next 24 hours, thinking this is the lowest point in my life. I could not have got any lower, but somehow I wanted to make an impact. Somehow I still wanted to live, and I just kind of found my why. And I went back to my thoughts and my mental process in terms of my mindsets in sports to try and pull myself out. And it took all my efforts. I think it must have been the hardest thing that I've ever done. And it took me years to pull myself out, and I had a mental breakdown doing it. But I really understand that process. And, with my activism today around racial inequality, around social injustice, around supporting LGBTQ youth, and, being able to get them back into society as leaders and mentors, it really is from my own experiences. And I think for many activists, if you look through their journey in their life, it's a very personal journey, and it's very personal as to the reasons why I'm a global LGBTQ activist, and that I raise my voice so loudly all the time.
Wow. Well, here you are. Amazing.
Yes.
And if I may, you are mentioning about networking and how important it's important to have a mentor for any person in any community. They need that need group. And you put together a foundation. Can you tell us about how it happened, and what was the start of it, and how it's been developing, and how it's been helping other people, other kids in situations that you have to confront during your life?
Sure. I kind of really thought with my platform, how can I make the greatest impact? I know I can't help everyone, but the few that I can help, it will change their life forever. And I think about this whole each one, treat one process. When you help someone else, hopefully that they will give it forward. So a couple of years ago in my own country, Vietnam, and I do a lot of piloting in my own country because it's a completely different climate and environment to work in. And I know if I can create success there, I can use that template and replicate it anywhere. So I piloted the first leadership, business, sports, and education program that looked at how you could provide very unique skills to LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness and then fast track them into career path development. And really, it's a program that I wanted as a teenager, where I could meet leaders in the community that shared my story, that looked like me, and where I could, be celebrated in a very safe environment and learn very unique skills through leadership and business and education and sport, because it's very well researched now that a person with a sports background will be a better employee than someone that doesn't, because we have a very unique skill set that those that haven't competed or don't have a lifetime in sports have. So this program, I'm then now looking at launching it in the US next year in Atlanta, Georgia, initially. And the reason why I'm launching it in the South in the US is because, one, if you change the South, you change the landscape of the US. But for the most part, this is where we have so many youth that are becoming homelessness because of the conservative environment, because of religion, and obviously there's a lack of programming there as well. So, for me, that will be my flagship program that I will look to scale into an academy where, hundreds of youth can go and learn these skills and meet leaders who, look like them, who have stories like them, and have, allies as well, but also knowing that there's some kind of fast track to career path employment. And the other work that I do is advocacy and campaigning, speaking to governments like yourself, as well as other governments, in terms of, the challenges and barriers that LGBTQ people face within the community, discussing what it is to be Asian and LGBTQ, and how we can use sport as a platform for equality and social change.
Amazing. I would like to go back a little bit to your story, the story that you just shared. There was not a single person that helped you. So it was just you on your own, or it was someone that gave you a hand?
No, it was just me on my own, which was the hardest thing when I was and because I didn't really have that many friends when I was a child, so I spent a lot of time reading about very successful people in the community. Like, they didn't know it, but Colonel Sanders, who created KFC, was a mentor. Walt Disney to me was a mentor. People that had extraordinary dreams and believed in themselves and made it come true. But it was very difficult, absolutely, to create a narrative out of nothing, and then to have this dream in your head that you were going to make an impact in this world. And I absolutely had no idea what it was. And I think, I spent so much time in the gym, particularly reading all the health and fitness and bodybuilding magazines. And, one person that really stood out to me was Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he was the only person that I kept reading about. And for me, it was about the story of someone who looked different, who sounded different, who had a name people couldn't understand or say, but then used this platform of sports to do these incredible things. So I really latched on to those different stories. And I think now, and that's why I share my story now, because it was so hard to do as a child when you don't have anyone to support you, where you don't have a mentor, where you don't have a story that you can read about that looks like you. And that's why I share my story a lot, because through storytelling, there's going to be some Asian person or Asian kid that hears me or sees me and thinks, that's my story, that's my narrative. I can see what is possible because of that person's story.
And following that idea, you were pretty much by yourself. So what is it that you suggest us as a community, also particularly also to the LGBT community, that we should be doing to address those issues and really help those kids who might be ended up homeless? What is it that you would say, this is what you need to do, this is how you reach to them?
Sure. And I think governments do play a role within their own community in terms of, how do you help your most vulnerable in the community, and particularly LGBTQ youth are your most vulnerable. And, and then obviously LGBTQ youth that are homeless. I think, one, doing things like this storytelling where people can just log in anonymously and share their story. I definitely feel, having more community events within your community and inviting all the local LGBTQ organizations to be part of the work that you do as a government, because they're the ones that are on the front line in terms of having access to these youth as well. And then, as a government, providing funding, because a lot of the activists and organizations on the ground, they really struggle in terms of LGBTQ funding to support shelters, to support education, to support, LGBTQ youth or LGBTQ people in general who are experiencing hardship and homelessness. And then also resources that you can place on social media, on your website, and they don't necessarily have to be your resources, because they could be pulled from organizations that you can align with in Spanish. So there are lots of things that you can do that are easy lifts. And I think as well, just going into the community and asking, how can we best serve you as, a government and as, a consulate in your prospective cities, but also working as well with the city as well and the mayor's office in tandem. And I think, there's always impact in terms of partnerships and allyships, because other governments are working and prioritizing LGBTQ rights as well. And some governments are further ahead. So I always say that governments should partner with each other to learn best practices.
Amazing. And nowadays, do you still, in the position you are you still facing discrimination? And if you do, how do you confront it? How do you defend yourself?
Sure. I mean, as an Asian person, I always face discrimination. I always face microaggressions, however subtle that they are. And obviously it's impacting as, being Asian, being a woman, obviously coming from the LGBTQ community. I think because I faced a lot of bullying and discrimination as a child, it really made me tough. Like, I feel now like I'm a tough person. I challenge people, and I think you have to challenge people, because if not, sometimes they don't even know if they're being homophobic or if they're being racist or sexist towards you. So, I challenge them, I call them out, and I educate people. I think that is very important. When someone says something that's a racist slur or a homophobic slur, I say, that's not okay, and this is the reason why it's not okay.
And, we're living very complicated days these last months with the pandemic. Is it something that you've learned from this particular period for you, for your work, and how to address to the society in general?
Sure. I mean, I think there's no way to prepare for a pandemic. I've definitely learned to pivot very quickly, because now we're in a virtual space. And I think the beauty of being in a virtual space is that we can connect to the world at once. I mean, I think the conversation that we're having now, I think one thing that I learned about myself is resilience. I definitely, like many people, you know, struggled in the beginning with the pandemic, and my mental health went, you know, up and down. I had some very down days when I literally I didn't really want to get out in bed, and I kind of had to stop myself because I was getting triggered by a lot of emotional moments, and I realized they were coming back from when I was homeless, of how I felt when I was homeless, feeling very isolated, feeling alone, feeling, you know, somewhat helpless and uncertain. But for me, I just had to go back to that moment, catch it, and think that was the hardest moment that I had in life, and I was able to push through it. And so can I through a pandemic. But I do know, I mean, many people, and particularly LGBTQ people, because of, you know, high levels of mental health, being stuck at home in situations where, you know, their family or relatives or whoever they're living with may not support, you know, their gender identity or their sexuality. But I think with the power of the internet, you know, we can remain connected in a way that we couldn't before, in terms of having a support network online, learning, you know, joining different social groups as well. And I think for the Asian community, one thing that we were really affected by was the COVID racism. This was something that we just didn't expect that people would attach, you know, and particularly the administration in the US, you know, our ethnicity to a virus and what that meant for our community and the backlash that we've had globally because of that.
Wow. Amazing. I'm sure, and I am convinced, that discrimination comes from a place of profound ignorance about the other. You were talking about education and the importance of it. So can you share with us, or can you name a few of the advancements that the LGBTQ community have been doing along the years, that are the ones that we should keep in mind?
Sure. I mean, obviously, every country is different. I mean, we still have over 70 countries that still criminalize homosexuality. And when I look at the continent of Asia, it goes from good to being, you know, buried up to your head and stoned to death. But I think, you know, particularly in the Western world and even now in Taiwan, marriage equality. And, you know, that's been just so important for the LGBTQ community, because it's the acknowledgement